There are betrayals that don't need a knife or a scream. They only need perfect timing, people leaving at the exact moment their responsibility matters most. In this story, a family walked out for the holiday, left the house freezing cold, and abandoned a dying stepfather to shiver in the dark. Then they reduced it to a single heartless message on the counter: handle him. The cruelty isn't just what they did to a helpless man, it's what they forced onto the one person they called back home to clean up the damage. Before we dive into today's story, let us know where you're tuning in from. It's always amazing to see where our stories travel. Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next twist in this journey. Now I'd like you to listen to his confession. 3 days before Christmas, my apartment felt quieter than usual. Not the peaceful kind of quiet, the earned kind, but the kind that settles in when everything outside is moving too fast. Deadlines were stacked on top of each other at the agency, end-of-year campaigns bleeding into one another, clients suddenly remembering things they should have approved weeks ago. I'd been living off bad takeout and colder coffee than I cared to admit. A mug sat untouched on my desk, the surface film already broken, the heat long gone. Still, for the first time in my life, the silence belonged to me. East Nashville had become that rare thing I never had growing up, space that didn't ask anything of me. No one needing a favor. No one assuming my time was available just because I existed. I paid my own rent. I controlled my own schedule. I could work late or shut the laptop at 6 and no one had a claim on either choice. That kind of freedom doesn't announce itself loudly. It settles in slowly, almost shyly, and once you notice it, you protect it instinctively. My phone buzzed on the desk. I didn't look at it right away. I already knew who it was. When I finally glanced down, the screen confirmed it: 7 missed calls from my mother. No voicemail, just persistence. The kind that says, "This isn't casual." I leaned back in my chair and exhaled through my nose. This was the time of year she always resurfaced with urgency. Christmas had a way of turning unspoken expectations into obligations. I'd learned that pattern early. Every December, my independence seemed to reset in her mind like it expired with the calendar. I told myself I'd call her back after finishing one more paragraph, then another. Then the phone buzzed again, lighting up the room. I stared at it for a full 10 seconds before answering. "Are you avoiding me?" My mother Celeste said, her voice already carrying that familiar blend of sweetness and disappointment. "I've been working," I said. Which was true, just not the whole truth. "Well, I've been calling," she replied lightly. I was starting to worry. She didn't ask how I was. She never did when there was a reason for the call. "What's going on?" I asked. A brief pause. I could hear movement on her end dishes, maybe. Normal sounds meant to signal nothing was wrong. So she said, easing into it, "What are your plans for Christmas this year? Your birthday's right there too. We need to know what you're doing." There it was. The annual inventory of my availability. "I'm planning to come by on Christmas Day," I said carefully. "Like always. Drop off gifts, stay for a bit. I've got work deadlines and some other plans, but I'll be there." I chose every word on purpose. She hummed, non-committal. "Okay." That was it. No pushback, no sigh, no guilt trip. It was so unlike her that it made my stomach tighten. "Well," she added, "this year's a little different anyway." I waited. "We've got something special planned," she said. "Just make sure you come by Christmas morning, like you always do. Don't worry about anything else." She said it as if it were reassurance, but she didn't ask if I was free. Didn't ask if that timing worked. She said, "Make sure and not would you mind." When the call ended, I stared at the darkened screen in my hand. The quiet returned heavier than before. For most people, that kind of calm would have felt like relief. For me, it felt like preparation, because I knew my family. And silence from my mother was never the absence of expectation. It was the sound of a plan already in motion. That evening, Nashville looked like it was trying to convince everyone things were fine. The streets were lined with lights. Storefronts glowed warm through their windows. Couples hurried past carrying bags and wreaths wrapped in scarves and routines. Holiday music spilled out of cars, stopped at red lights. It was all meant to soften people, make them generous, make them overlook things they shouldn't. I drove home from the office with my jaw tight, replaying my mother's tone over and over. That easy confidence, the way she'd ended the conversation as if it were settled. My phone rang again. This time I answered immediately. She was smiling when the FaceTime connected. Too cheerful. The kind of smile that arrives with news already decided. "We've been talking," she said. "Your father and I, and Kendra and Miles." My grip on the steering wheel tightened, and I asked. "We're going to Hawaii," she said, bright. "From Christmas through New Year's. A cruise. It'll be good for everyone." I waited for the rest of the sentence. It didn't come. "So who's staying with the boys?" I asked. She blinked, genuinely surprised by the question. "You are." The word landed clean and final. "That's not happening," I said, keeping my voice level. I never agreed to that. She laughed softly as if I'd made a joke. "Riven, you're single. You don't have kids. This will be good experience for you." I felt something cold move through my chest. "You're calling that a gift?" I asked. "Of course," she said. "Your birthday's right there. What better present than responsibility?" There it was, the reframing. Turning obligation into gratitude. Turning my personal life into an open schedule. "I have work," I said. "Deadlines, friends. A life that doesn't include being a full-time babysitter for a week." She waved a hand. "The tickets are already booked. They're non-refundable." I stared at the road, at the red brake lights stretching ahead of me. "So you planned all of this without asking me," I said. "And now you're telling me because you assume I'll say yes." "Well," she said, her tone shifting. "What kind of person would say no?" There it was. The second lock. "This isn't about being a good person," I said. "It's about basic respect. If you want help, you ask. And you accept the answer." "The boys are excited," she pressed. "They've been talking about you non-stop. You love them. You wouldn't let them down." That was the third lock, the one that always worked. I pictured Bennett trying to act older than he was. Jace bouncing off the walls. Theo falling asleep against my shoulder during movie nights. I did love them. That was never the question. Which was exactly why this was working the way she intended. "I'm not doing it," I said. "If you want to go find someone else, or change the plan." Her voice sharpened instantly. "You're being selfish." "No," I said. "I'm being clear. You're ruining Christmas for everyone. If everyone's happiness depends on me giving up a week of my life without consent." I said then that happiness was never real. She didn't respond right away. When she did, her voice was suddenly calm again. Controlled. "Let me have your father talk to you," she said. "He'll explain it better." The call ended. I sat in my car for a long moment after the engine idling, holiday music still playing softly in the background. I knew this move. I'd seen it my entire life. When pressure didn't work, they brought out reason. When reason didn't work, they brought out family. And when family didn't work, they rewrote the story until I did. I watched the screen fade to black and felt the weight settle in my chest. The conversation hadn't even started yet. But somewhere between her smile and that final confident click, I understood something clearly for the first time. They weren't asking for my help. They were counting on my compliance. The night before Christmas didn't feel like Christmas. Not in the way I remembered it as a kid, with warmth humming through the house and cinnamon in the air and laughter spilling out of every room. In my apartment in East Nashville, there was only the sound of a neighbor's Christmas playlist coming muffled through the wall, a reminder that the world was still turning festive, even if mine had come to a slow, aching crawl. I had just gotten off a call with Harper. She was one of the few people in my life who didn't try to convince me I was being too sensitive. When I told her what my parents had sprung on me, this so-called birthday gift of babysitting while they escaped to Hawaii, she didn't laugh, didn't placate. She just said flatly, "They're using the kids to tie you down. Don't get pulled into arguing morals. This isn't about who's right. It's about your line. Draw it. And let there be consequences if they cross it." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. Yeah. Don't yeah me, Riven. Say it like you mean it. I let out a breath. If they cross the line, they'll get the fallout. I won't be guilted into giving up my time again. Not 5 minutes after I hung up, my phone buzzed again. Dad. Of course. He always came in after Mom had pushed too hard, like a mop sent in to clean up the emotional spill. I answered, expecting the usual calm tone, the rational appeal. And he delivered. Hey son, he said, his voice easy, like nothing was wrong. I don't want this to get tense. Let's just talk. I didn't say anything. He took the silence as an opening. I know your mother can be intense, but she means well. This whole trip, it's something they've planned a long time. And you know how much the boys love you. My grip on the phone tightened. Dad, I said, keeping my voice steady, I'm not available. I've got work, I've got plans. I'm not babysitting. He didn't argue, didn't push. That's what made it worse. No one's asking you to stay the whole week, he said, like he was offering a treaty. Just swing by on Christmas morning. Bring the gifts. Share breakfast. Then you're free to go. I narrowed my eyes at the ceiling. You're sure that's all? Absolutely. Nothing more. I paused. Because I'm not staying and I'm not babysitting. This isn't a trick. Of course not, he said, almost too fast. Just a short visit like old times. I hung up with a knot in my gut. It was too smooth, too agreeable. My dad rarely folded that easily, especially when Mom was on a mission. Still, I tried to believe it. I spent the next day wrapping gifts for the boys, maybe a little too lovingly for someone who was only planning a short visit. I picked out a fantasy graphic novel for Bennett, a sleek engineering kit for Jace, and a plush dinosaur pajama set for Theo, complete with matching slippers. I could already imagine their eyes lighting up. As I tied ribbons and taped tags, I told myself, this is all you're doing. You're not stepping past what you said you would. And I meant it. Or I thought I did. That night around 10 p.m., I sent a text, I'll be there by 11 tomorrow. I didn't expect a reply. Mom usually left my messages on read until she felt like answering. But this time her response came back within seconds. Okay. We'll be waiting. Be on time. That was it. No hearts, no Merry Christmas Eve, no playful guilt, just a cold timestamp like a boarding pass. I stared at it for a long time, unsettled by how rehearsed it felt. They weren't waiting for a visit. They were waiting for a handoff. Christmas morning was the kind of crisp you only get in Tennessee after a cold front sweeps through, when the sky is pale blue and the sun throws sharp shadows on every snow-dusted rooftop. I left East Nashville with the passenger seat full of gifts and a quiet in my chest I couldn't shake. The streets were mostly empty, save for the occasional bundled-up couple walking a dog or a family herding kids into a minivan. My radio was playing some smooth jazz rendition of Silent Night, but it only made the hollowness sharper. Franklin, where my parents lived, looked like something off a holiday postcard. Their cul-de-sac was lined with wreaths and bows, the home symmetrical and grand, every porch lit with golden lights. But as I pulled up in front of their house, something was off. The driveway was empty. Not just theirs, no sign of Kendra or Miles either. Normally their SUV would already be parked, and I'd hear chatter through the windows, the clatter of dishes, the heat of too many voices in one space. But the house stood still, too still. Lights were on. Garland hung perfectly across the porch railing. A candle flickered in the front window. It was staged, pristine, untouched. I climbed the steps and rang the doorbell. No answer. I reached for the knob. It turned easily. And when I stepped inside, I knew immediately something was wrong. The air inside was warm, scented faintly with cinnamon rolls, but there were no voices, no footsteps, no music. Just silence. Until I heard a thud, then little feet. Bennett appeared in the hallway, his eyes wide and bright. "Uncle Riven," he shouted before launching into a hug. Jace and Theo tumbled in behind him, talking over each other, grabbing at my hands and sleeves. "Merry Christmas." "Did you bring my gift? I made you a card." I blinked, still holding my coat. "Where's your mom and dad? Where's everyone?" Bennett looked up at me with an odd mixture of excitement and certainty. They went on a trip, he said. Grandma said you're staying with us. My heart dropped. The living room was lit up, tree-sparkling stockings hung. But there was no noise except the boys' delighted squeals. The kitchen table had half-eaten cinnamon rolls, orange juice still sweating in cups. Like someone had eaten and left quickly just after setting the stage. Hang on, I said, trying to sound calm. Why don't we open some gifts, yeah? Let's sit by the tree. They cheered, diving toward the presents. As they tore through wrapping paper, I scanned the room. That's when I saw an envelope on the coffee table propped up where I couldn't miss it. My name was on the front. Inside a note written in my mother's looping cursive. We flew out on the 9 a.m. flight. Breakfast is done, lunch is in the fridge. There's a full meal plan for the week taped to the side of the fridge. Emergency contacts are listed. Theo takes his allergy meds after dinner. Bedtime is 8:30 for Bennett and Jace, 7 o'clock for Theo. Love you, Mom. My stomach turned. This wasn't improvisation. This was planned. I walked to the kitchen. Sure enough, the fridge had notes pinned to it. Color-coded lists, a day-by-day breakdown, even a medical sheet with Theo's doctor's number. I wasn't being asked. I'd been replaced. I stepped back into the hallway and dialed Mom's number. It rang 4 times before she picked up. Hi, sweetie, she said, not breathless or apologetic. Just casual. Everything okay? The boys got their gifts. My voice cracked. You left them here. Well, of course, she said gently. You said you were coming. We knew we could count on you. There was no room for shock. She was too calm, too pleased. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a handoff. And I was the idiot who walked right into it. I gripped the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. I walked deeper into the kitchen, shut the door softly behind me, and kept my voice low so the boys wouldn't hear. Where are you? I asked. There was a pause, then a breeze through the line rustling like palms, followed by laughter in the background. Then my mother's voice, light as ever. Hawaii. I said nothing. She laughed softly, like it was all a surprise. Your father and I needed a little break, and we thought what better gift for your birthday than a meaningful experience. You've always been so great with the boys. Now you get to bond with them. Think of it as childcare with a view from the moral high ground. My stomach dropped. You think this is a gift? You're always talking about boundaries and family riven. Well, now you have a chance to step up. Show the boys what that really looks like. You didn't even ask me. You would have said no, she said lightly. You've been so distant, closed off lately. No, I said flatly. I've been clear. I could hear the ocean. I could almost see them there. Drinks in hand, guiltless, as if this were normal. I'll ask you again, I said. Who is the legal guardian currently present in this house with 3 minors? You're there. I closed my eyes. I'm here for breakfast, like we agreed. I never consented to stay. You left the country. Oh, come on. You love them. You'd never leave them. You're too responsible. And there it was. The card they always played. Not duty, not trust, but guilt, sugar-coated with love. Manipulation dressed up like flattery. I won't abandon them, I said quietly. But I won't carry your responsibility either. If you and Dad don't return by tonight, I'm reporting this. I will not play pretend for you. She was quiet for a second. Then her voice dropped into something more composed. I knew you'd say that, she said. You're still a good man. Even after everything. That last line sounded almost smug. They had banked on my predictability, on my unwillingness to cause a scene. They counted on my heart to keep me stuck. But not this time. I walked out of the kitchen. The boys were tearing into their toys. Bennett was carefully peeling the tape off a box. Theo had one foot stuck in the leg of his new pajamas. Jace was already assembling the tech set like it was a national mission. I sat on the couch, pulled out my phone, and dialed. The 911 operator answered. I gave my name, the address, and a simple summary. I arrived this morning for a family holiday visit. No adults were here, only 3 minors. I found a handwritten note stating my parents were in Hawaii. They never asked or received consent for me to stay. The operator kept her voice calm, but I could hear the pen scratching. They've left the children unsupervised, she asked. Yes. The note includes instructions, emergency contacts, even dietary needs, so clearly this wasn't an accident. I hung up heart-hammering, but something inside me settled too. For the first time, I wasn't just reacting. I was doing something that couldn't be spun or softened. I returned to the living room where the boys were now play-fighting over wrapping paper. I smiled and crouched beside them. Hey guys. Someone's coming over soon to check that everything's okay. They just want to make sure you're safe. Theo climbed into my lap without hesitation. Are we in trouble? No, buddy, I said. Not at all. 15 minutes later, I saw the squad car pull up. One officer stepped out, then another. Across the street, blinds twitched in the neighbor's window. Suburbia noticed everything, especially when uniforms showed up at a house like this. I met the officers at the door and explained again. I showed the note, the texts, and let them into the house. They nodded along, asked for names and relationships. So you're their uncle, one asked. Did you agree to supervise them? I agreed to come for breakfast, I said. That's it. This wasn't consent. This was entrapment. One officer took photos of the handwritten note, the fridge schedule, the labeled snacks and medications. The other asked me to confirm if I had power of attorney or any guardianship papers. I don't, I said. Nothing official, and none was requested. They called my parents. And that's when the tone shifted. I could hear the voices crackling through the speaker. My mother sounded thrown, like she couldn't quite believe the police were real, like she'd expected I'd fold quietly. Then my father got on the line and his voice came through sharp and clipped. He's overreacting, he said. This is a family matter, the officer replied calmly. It became more than that the moment children were left alone without a designated guardian. My father said something under his breath. The line went dead. I looked out the window again. The sky was clear. Still, but I could feel it. The real storm hadn't even begun. The living room felt like a courtroom. Not officially, of course, but that's what it was. Officers jotting notes, the fridge evidence bagged, the boys restless shifting between innocence and unease. Theo had started sucking his thumb eyes glassy. Jace was full of restless energy, poking at things, building and knocking over. Bennett sat on the floor cross-legged, staring into Space Jaw, set like he was trying not to cry. I got up and moved through the motions. Warm water for Theo, goldfish crackers for Jace. I asked Bennett to help Theo get his new hoodie on. Small actions, soft structure, something to hang on to. The officer in charge asked me to open the fridge again. I pulled open the door, and what I saw made my stomach lurch. Not just labeled meals, but a full itinerary for each kid. Bennett, 30 minutes iPad max. No screens after 7:30. Theo, reminder, has mild allergy to strawberries. Jace, meds in drawer, 2 left side under vitamins. And then a sticky note, Riven knows all this. Not a question, not a suggestion, a declaration. They were framing this like I'd known all along. My heart started pounding again. I wasn't just being used, I was being written into the story, cast in a role I didn't audition for. Just then, my phone lit up again. Dad. I stepped away, answered. What the hell are you doing? He hissed. You called the cops on your own family. What's wrong with you? I didn't call the cops on my family. I reported child abandonment. You're making a scene. You're embarrassing us. I'm protecting them. You're blowing this out of proportion. You lied. You left the country. You tricked me into being here. Silence. Then, this is insane. No, I said. It's finally sane. I hung up before he could say more. I returned to the officer's hands, steady. Any update, I asked. The officer nodded. We've contacted the parents. At this stage, we're determining if an emergency order needs to be filed or if the guardians can return promptly. He looked at me carefully. Would you be willing to remain on site until a solution is arranged? Yes, I said. But I'm not assuming legal responsibility for them. He nodded. We'll record that. Everything slowed, measured, mechanical, until I found myself standing by the Christmas tree watching the lights blink on and off in a soft, oblivious rhythm. The gifts were half unwrapped. Bits of paper still clung to ribbon. 3 little boys sat in a room that should have been filled with joy, not suspicion. I took a breath. They counted on my guilt, my softness, my need to keep everyone okay, and I wasn't letting that control me anymore. I turned to the officer again. I'll stay, I said. I'll keep them safe, but I'm not cleaning up after this. Outside, I heard the rumble of tires on the driveway. The officers exchanged a look. Looks like they're coming back. I walked to the window. The neighbors were still watching. And as the front door creaked open, I braced for the next chapter, not a reunion, not forgiveness, but a reckoning. By the time I pulled out of their cul-de-sac, the sky had already darkened into that heavy, silent gray that presses down on you before a storm. It wasn't raining yet, but something inside me already felt soaked. The kids were safe now, I told myself. The police had taken my statement. I'd given them every piece of evidence down to the damn note my sister left in Sharpie on the fridge. But there was no victory in it. Only this strange, raw emptiness. My hands were shaking on the wheel all the way back to East Nashville. I got home to my apartment and collapsed on the couch without turning the lights on. My phone buzzed every few minutes, texts, calls, probably my mom, maybe Kendra, or even Miles trying to control the narrative now that it had slipped out of their hands. I didn't answer. I couldn't. I lay there staring at the ceiling, reminding myself that I hadn't done anything wrong. And yet all I felt was guilt's shadow curling itself around my chest. They came back the same night. The police had called them directly, and with enough heat on them now, they couldn't afford to stay in paradise. When I saw them show up at the house later in the evening, caught in a neighbor's photo that ended up in a group text, I felt the knot in my chest twist harder, not because they were back, but because I knew exactly what was coming. They didn't come back to make it right. They came back to spin it. Outside the house, in front of the patrol car still parked by the curb, my father spoke with practiced ease, arms folded like he had nothing to hide. I'd heard that voice all my life, the one he used when talking to clients, principals, or anyone he needed to manipulate. This was a misunderstanding, he said. We left instructions. Riven was supposed to be there. He's family. I watched from a distance, unseen. I watched him say my name like I was a favor owed, like I wasn't even a person but a tool, something expected to work quietly and without protest. And then Kendra chimed in. Riven doesn't have a family of his own. He's always great with the kids. He was the obvious choice. That did it. I stepped forward not to start a fight but to end one. I kept my voice level and made sure the officer could hear every word. I was never asked, I said. I was never told you were leaving town. I came by to drop off gifts and was ambushed. I never agreed to babysit your kids for a week. They didn't look at me then, not directly. But I saw the flicker in my father's jaw, the way my mother's smile froze at the edges. They hadn't expected me to speak, not in front of authority. When the police left, I knew exactly what would happen. With the heat off and the official warning given, they'd turn on me. And they did the moment the squad car disappeared. You humiliated this family, my father snapped, voice sharp with restrained fury. In front of the whole damn neighborhood, you made a scene. You ruined Christmas, my mom added, her voice catching like she was the victim. Do you know what Bennett asked when we got back? He asked why Uncle Riven hated him. You blew this up because you're petty, Miles said. Because you can't let things go. They thought if they surrounded me with shame I'd fold. I didn't. The moment you left those kids alone, you destroyed Christmas, I said evenly. I didn't ruin anything. I protected them. And before they could weaponize the guilt any further, I turned and walked out the back door. I'd parked at the end of the block on purpose so I wouldn't have to face them again on the porch, wouldn't have to see the kids watching through the window. I didn't say goodbye to the adults. I did kneel down briefly to hug Theo and squeeze Bennett's shoulder. I told Jace he'd do great at his spelling bee. I left fast so I wouldn't cry. That night my phone kept buzzing again, but this time with Facebook notifications. My mother had posted. It was vague as I knew it would be. A long post about disappointments, people who forget the meaning of family, and a generation so wrapped up in individualism that they forget their responsibilities. No names. But enough breadcrumbs to let everyone guess who she meant. The comments came in like flies to a carcass. So sad, especially around the holidays. Family is everything. Shame to see someone turn their back on their own blood. I took screenshots of everything. This wasn't just deflection, it was a calculated smear campaign. They couldn't control what happened with the police, but they could try to control public opinion. And they were good at it. I called Harper. She didn't even say hello, just answered with a quiet, "You okay?" "I'm fine," I lied. "No, you're not," she said. "But you will be. Listen, if you don't speak up, they win by default." I didn't want to. I was tired. I was drained. But she was right. So I wrote a post of my own. I didn't name names either, but I laid out the facts calmly, clearly, like someone finally drawing the boundaries of their own name. I said I was invited over for Christmas morning. I said I walked into a house with 3 minor children and no adults present. I said I later received a call from Hawaii where I was informed that my gift as a single man was a week of unpaid, unplanned babysitting. I said I called the police not out of spite, but because those kids deserved a legal guardian and I wasn't one. And then I ended it simply: I didn't abandon children. I refused to be abandoned for them. I posted it. And for the first time that week, I put my phone down and let the silence be mine. The response was more than I expected. It wasn't just friends, it was people I hadn't spoken to in years, people sharing the post because they'd seen their own stories in mine. People who'd been manipulated, guilt-tripped, used by family. People who were finally saying me too. By the next morning, the tides were turning. That's when my mom posted a follow-up, short, apologetic in tone laced with words like miscommunication and grateful for the reminder of boundaries. I didn't believe it for a second. A few minutes later, I got a message from my grandmother. "They're not sorry, Riven," she wrote. "They're scared." That was when it really hit me. They weren't backing down. They were regrouping. And if I thought this was the end, I was wrong. The email came on a Tuesday. I was sitting at my kitchen table sipping cold coffee and trying to get through work emails when I saw the subject line regarding recent events. It was from my father. I stared at it for a long time before opening it. I already knew it wouldn't be an apology. I was right. He started by acknowledging the incident, as he called it. He said they'd apologized publicly and that it should be more than sufficient to close the matter. He went on to say that I had overreacted and damaged family ties in a moment of emotional immaturity. The final paragraph was the real dagger. "Until you're ready to own your part in this, we believe it's best that you refrain from attending family gatherings going forward. We hope time will bring perspective." I didn't reply. Instead, I forwarded the email to my grandmother and called her immediately. She answered on the second ring. "Riven, I want to read you something I said, and then I did word for word." When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "That's not a boundary. That's punishment." "I know. It's control disguised as consequence," she added. "They're trying to isolate you." Again. She was quiet again. Then, "Riven, it may be time to talk to someone legally." I didn't want to go that far. But when I scrolled through Facebook later that night and saw new posts, this time from Kendra, casting vague insults about family members who crave attention and people who distort stories to go viral, I realized my grandmother was right. They weren't backing down. They were escalating. And I wasn't going to wait around to be blindsided again. I started saving everything, every screenshot, every message, every comment from extended family calling me ungrateful, unstable, dramatic. I didn't respond. I just built the archive. Then I made an appointment. Tessa Lang was sharp, precise, and didn't flinch when I showed her what I'd collected. She nodded through my timeline, asked clear questions, and then laid out the options. "We can start with a formal cease and desist," she said. "It tells them we're watching and it gives them a chance to stop. If they don't, we escalate to defamation and harassment filings. And the kids, I asked quietly. That's trickier, she said. But as long as you're not being legally prevented from contact, you can choose how to navigate that separately carefully. I left her office with a folder in my hand and a weight lifted off my shoulders, not because anything was solved, but because for the first time I felt like I wasn't fighting in the dark. The next day, Tessa sent the letter. No more passive posts. No more guilt-tripping voicemails. No more manipulations passed off as love. From now on, if they wanted to talk to me, they'd have to go through my lawyer. I knew what it meant. I might be closing a door that would never open again. I might be losing the illusion of family for good, but I also knew what I was gaining. My voice, my peace, my self-respect. I didn't post about the letter, I didn't announce it. I just turned off my phone, made myself dinner, and let the quiet be mine again. And for the first time in years, Christmas didn't feel like a trap. It felt like a choice. And I had finally made mine. Some stories don't offer a clean resolution, only a quiet moment when the weight finally lifts. And maybe that's enough. What we just heard wasn't just about a holiday gone wrong or a family crossing a line. It was about the courage it takes to name something for what it really is, even when everyone else would rather you keep pretending. We don't always get to choose the families we're born into, but we can choose what kind of person we become in response. And sometimes the kindest thing we can do for ourselves for the next generation is to end a cycle. Not with anger, but with clarity. Not with revenge, but with boundaries. That takes strength, and it takes time. If somewhere in this story you saw a piece of yourself, and you're still holding it quietly, that's okay. When you're ready, feel free to leave a few words in the comments. We read everyone. And if this kind of space helps you breathe a little deeper, you're always welcome to join us again. Just hit subscribe and stay close. Thanks for being with us today. We'll see you in the next story.